Some of these men were considered the greatest actors who ever lived. One of them died on the floor of a pub with a $400 bar tab. Another had his spine rebuilt after surgeons discovered it was coated in crystallized alcohol. And the man sitting at number 1 on this list, someone you almost certainly know, outdrank every single person on it, including the ones who drank themselves to death. Stay with me, because this is not just a list. Every name on it is a story, and some of them will genuinely change the way you think about the golden age of Hollywood. These are the 10 greatest alcohol tragedies in Hollywood history. Number 10. Oliver Reed. Oliver Reed was born in Wimbledon, England in 1938. And from the moment he appeared on screen, he had the kind of raw, dangerous presence that directors either loved or feared. Over a career spanning 4 decades, he appeared in more than 100 films, among them the Oscar-winning musical Oliver, The Three Musketeers, and The Devils. He was physically imposing, deeply talented, and completely ungovernable. His blue eyes, his scarred face, the result of a bar fight in which attackers came after him with broken bottles, leaving him with 63 stitches, and his extraordinary screen gravity made him one of the most distinctive actors of his generation. Ridley Scott wanted him badly enough to cast him in what would become one of the most celebrated films of the year 2000, Gladiator. Reed would play Proximo, the old Gladiator trainer. Scott gave him the role with one condition: no drinking during production. Reed agreed. He kept his word through the early weeks of filming in Morocco. Russell Crowe later confirmed that Reed was disciplined when production began, but by the time the crew moved to Malta, the discipline had cracked. On the morning of May 2nd, 1999, Oliver Reed walked into a small bar on Archbishop Street in Valletta called, simply, The Pub. He was 61 years old. A group of Royal Navy sailors from the HMS Cumberland walked in on shore leave. A drinking contest began. Over the course of that afternoon, Reed reportedly consumed 8 pints of lager, 12 shots of rum, half a bottle of whiskey, and several measures of cognac. He also won 5 consecutive arm wrestling matches against the young sailors. Then he collapsed. He was pronounced gone in the ambulance. His bar tab was $435. Ridley Scott later said simply, "One Sunday morning, he dropped down dead on the floor of a pub." Because Reed had not yet completed his final scenes, Scott spent $3.2 million using pioneering computer technology to place Reed's face onto a body double and finish the film. For his performance, Reed received a posthumous BAFTA nomination. The pub in Valletta became a shrine, and Gladiator, the film he died making, went on to win the Academy Award for Best Picture. Number 9. Richard Burton. Born Richard Jenkins in a small Welsh mining village in 1925, the 12th of 13 children of a coal miner, Richard Burton became one of the most celebrated actors in the history of cinema. 7 Academy Award nominations. A voice, a deep, resonant Welsh baritone that could hold a theater completely still. He starred alongside Elizabeth Taylor in Cleopatra, received universal praise for Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and was spoken of in the same breath as Laurence Olivier. He was, by almost any measure, among the 2 or 3 finest actors his generation produced. He also started drinking at the age of 11. He said so himself, openly, in interviews. He inherited it from his father, who could drink any man in the Welsh valleys under the table, and who died of a brain hemorrhage, the exact same cause of death that would eventually take Richard Burton. At his worst, Burton consumed 3 bottles of vodka a day. During the filming of The Klansman in 1974, he was barely able to stand and had to shoot much of the film from a seated or lying position. He once downed 21 shots of tequila before jumping into the sea when someone nearby reported a shark sighting. He and Elizabeth Taylor, the great love of his life, they married twice and never truly escaped each other, were as famous in Hollywood for what they consumed together as for what they created together. In May of 1975, Burton's personal diary contained 6 consecutive daily entries of a single word, booze. On the 7th day, the entry read, "Went into clinic late afternoon." In the early 1980s, a spinal operation revealed something that left his surgeons speechless. His entire spinal column was coated in crystallized alcohol. The years of consumption had physically altered the structure of his spine. Doctors had to build up his body weight before they could even attempt the procedure, because he was dangerously underweight. The operation rebuilt his backbone, a surgery that could have left him paralyzed if anything had gone wrong. He recovered. He returned to work. But the damage accumulating over 30 years of excess could not be undone by a single operation. In 1984, Richard Burton died of a brain hemorrhage in Switzerland at the age of 58, the same way his father had gone before him. 7 Oscar nominations, not 1 win. And those closest to him said the bottle had stolen the discipline that his extraordinary talent deserved. Number 8. Barbara Payton. Barbara Payton arrived in Hollywood in the late 1940s as one of the most physically striking women the industry had seen in years. Blonde, luminous, and seemingly built for stardom, she shared the screen in the early 1950s with James Cagney, Gary Cooper, and Gregory Peck. The trajectory of her career suggested she was on her way to the very top. What happened instead is one of the most sobering cautionary tales in Hollywood history, and one of the least told. Her personal life was in chaos almost from the beginning. Violent relationships, instability, and a dependence on alcohol that deepened as her career stalled combined to accelerate a decline that was staggering in its speed. By the late 1950s, the woman who had appeared opposite some of Hollywood's biggest names was struggling to find any work at all. By the early 1960s, she had lost custody of her son. In 1962, she was found by police sleeping at a bus stop on Sunset Boulevard wearing a coat over a bathing suit, publicly intoxicated. Later that same year, she was arrested again for disorderly conduct at an afternoon gathering. The career, the contracts, the studio connections, all of it gone. In 1967, Barbara Payton was found deceased at the age of 39, from heart and liver failure. Those who had known her in her prime said she was unrecognizable. A woman who had been one of the most beautiful faces on the Paramount lot was gone before she turned 40. Her story is not one Hollywood talked about much at the time. It probably should have been. Number 7. John Barrymore. John Barrymore was born in 1882 into the most famous theatrical family in American history. Known as the Great Profile, a reference to his classically sculpted face that seemed made for the stage, he was hailed as one of the finest Shakespearean actors of his era. His Hamlet was called definitive. He transitioned from silent films to talkies with complete authority and commanded both. He was the patriarch and the idol of a group of spectacularly talented, spectacularly self-destructive men who gathered regularly at an artist's studio on Bundy Drive in Brentwood, a circle that included Errol Flynn, W.C. Fields, director Raoul Walsh, and journalist Gene Fowler. This group became known as the Bundy Drive Boys, and those who knew them said they made the famous Rat Pack of the Sinatra era look restrained by comparison. By the mid-1930s, Barrymore's career was visibly declining. The memory was going. By 1936, he needed cue cards to deliver his lines, an almost unthinkable situation for a man who had once commanded Shakespeare from memory. On May 29, 1942, while recording a radio segment of Romeo and Juliet, John Barrymore collapsed at the microphone. He died 2 days later of cirrhosis of the liver complicated by kidney failure. He was 60 years old. What allegedly happened next is one of the most debated stories in all of Hollywood legend. According to Errol Flynn's memoir, published shortly after Flynn's own death in 1959, director Raoul Walsh, unable to simply grieve quietly, made his way to the funeral parlor where Barrymore's body was being held, arranged for the body to be released to him through a combination of persuasion and cash, transported it to Flynn's house, and propped it upright in Flynn's favorite chair. When Flynn returned home later that evening and turned on the lights, he came face to face with his dead mentor staring back at him. By Flynn's account, he screamed, ran through the house, and made it as far as the front porch before Walsh and the others caught him and explained it was a prank. Flynn later wrote, "It was no way to remember the passing of John Barrymore. He was shaken and sobered for the rest of the night." Now here is where the story gets genuinely interesting. Other accounts dispute the whole thing entirely. Gene Fowler's son later stated that he and his father sat vigil with Barrymore's body all night and that no such thing ever took place. A historian who wrote the definitive book on the Bundy Drive Boys believes Flynn and Walsh invented the story as a way of honoring their idol, of giving him one final outrageous chapter worthy of the life he had lived. And Barrymore's own granddaughter, actress Drew Barrymore, was asked about it directly in a 2020 interview, and neither fully confirmed nor denied it. True or not, it is a story that says everything about the era, the men, and the extraordinary grief-soaked way this particular circle of Hollywood said goodbye. Number 6. Jan Michael Vincent. In the 1970s and early 1980s, Jan Michael Vincent was described by more than one Hollywood publication as the next major American movie star. He was called the Brad Pitt of his era, extraordinarily handsome, naturally charismatic, and in possession of a physicality that the camera loved completely. His path to fame had been almost suspiciously easy. He was discovered by a talent scout while serving in the California Army National Guard, bypassing the years of struggle that most actors endure, and was almost immediately cast opposite established stars like John Wayne, Charles Bronson, and Burt Reynolds. By the early 1980s, he was starring in the television series Errol and becoming the highest-paid actor on American television at the time. What the money did was remove every remaining obstacle between John Michael Vincent and his worst impulses. The cocaine and the alcohol that had been manageable appetites became consuming ones. By the second and third seasons of Errol, his behavior was causing production delays and significant budget overruns. The show was canceled. His A-list career collapsed into B-movies. In 1996, he was involved in a near-fatal car accident that broke his neck and revealed extreme intoxication at the time of the crash. Over the following years, he lost a leg to a vascular condition almost certainly accelerated by years of substance use. The man who had been handed the keys to Hollywood without ever having to ask for them ended his career as a cautionary story that nobody in the industry wanted to tell out loud. John Michael Vincent died in 2019 at the age of 74 from a cardiac arrest. The obituaries were brief. The contrast with what he might have been was enormous. Number 5. Errol Flynn. Errol Flynn was at his peak in the late 1930s and through the 1940s, arguably the most exciting movie star on the planet. Born in Tasmania, Australia in 1909, he arrived in Hollywood with a swagger that the studios immediately recognized as something money could not manufacture. He was Robin Hood. He was Captain Blood. He was the definitive screen adventurer of his generation, athletic, impossibly handsome, charming in a way that made audiences forget entirely that they were watching a performance. Warner Bros. Built an entire era of adventure cinema around him. His Malibu home, which he shared for a time with fellow actor David Niven, had a nickname among the Hollywood set. They called it Cirrhosis by the Sea. The name tells you everything you need to know about what went on inside it. Flynn's private yacht was the site of parties that became legendary for their excess. He showed up to film sets in visible states of intoxication on more than one occasion. He once bet $500 with crew members that he could seduce his co-star Olivia de Havilland on set, a bet that de Havilland herself later addressed in interviews, though the outcome was never fully confirmed. He drank with Fidel Castro in Cuba. He drank with the Bundy Drive boys in Brentwood. He drank everywhere, constantly, and with the kind of theatrical commitment that seemed for a long time to be part of the performance. When Flynn was in his early 30s, a doctor told him his heart and lungs had already sustained irreversible damage. He received that information and appears to have treated it as a minor inconvenience. By the time he died in October 1959, at the age of 50, his once magnificent physical presence had been hollowed out by cirrhosis. The body found in Vancouver, where he had traveled to sell his yacht to pay creditors, belonged to a man who looked decades older than his age. He had burned through one of the most natural gifts Hollywood ever received in approximately 20 years. And the tragedy was not that he didn't know. He absolutely knew. He simply chose not to stop. Number 4. Humphrey Bogart. Humphrey Bogart is widely considered one of the 2 or 3 greatest male actors in the history of American cinema. Casablanca, The Maltese Falcon, The African Queen, The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. The performances are so embedded in American culture that it is nearly impossible to imagine the golden age of Hollywood without him. He won the Academy Award for Best Actor in 1952 for The African Queen. He was nominated 3 times. He is, by almost universal agreement among film scholars, as close to irreplaceable as anyone who ever worked in the industry. He was also, by the time the evening arrived, frequently not someone you wanted to be around. A close friend once described him this way: Bogart is a genuinely good man until around 11:30 at night. After that, he transforms into the version of himself he believes Bogart to be. That second version could be combative, stubborn, and in his darker moments, unkind. He arrived on sets intoxicated or deeply hungover on a number of documented occasions. During the filming of Sahara, he reportedly refused to leave his dressing room until his wife at the time brought him a thermos filled with martinis. He once left a restaurant having walked out with the establishment's safe, which he subsequently abandoned on Beverly Hills Boulevard. He was eventually barred from a significant number of bars and clubs after a string of incidents, including one in which he assaulted several women who had attempted to take from him a toy panda bear he had brought to an exclusive club as what he described as a drinking companion. He drank with Richard Burton. He drank with Frank Sinatra. He drank with Oliver Reed's predecessor generation of Hollywood hellraisers, and according to reports, he gave as good as he got. In 1956, Humphrey Bogart was diagnosed with esophageal cancer, almost certainly accelerated by decades of heavy drinking combined with chain smoking. He died in January 1957 at the age of 57. In his final weeks, he could still be found holding a glass of sherry. There was, it seems, never going to be a version of Humphrey Bogart that put the glass down before the last possible moment. Number 3. Peter O'Toole. 8 Academy Award nominations, not 1 win. That statistic alone is one of the most extraordinary in the history of the Oscars, and it belongs to a man who many serious film critics believe gave the single greatest male performance ever captured on film, in David Lean's Lawrence of Arabia in 1962. Peter O'Toole was Irish-born, trained in classical theater, and possessed of a physical beauty and an intellectual intensity that made him unlike almost anyone else working in Hollywood during his era. His Lawrence was not just a performance, it was a landmark. His relationship with alcohol was established early and maintained consistently. During the filming of Lawrence of Arabia, his off-hours escapades in Beirut became stories that the production team told for years. He was reportedly in a visible state of intoxication through the entire filming of the 1964 historical epic Beckett, a film in which his performance was nonetheless considered extraordinary, which perhaps says as much about the scale of his talent as anything else. He once took a date to the theater in London, settled into his seat, and gradually realized that the play being performed was one in which he himself was supposed to be on stage. On another occasion, he reportedly woke up in Corsica with no clear memory of how he had left Paris. He later claimed to have learned about the assassination of President Kennedy 22 years after it occurred, entirely because the news had reached him during a period when he was not in a condition to receive it. In the 1970s, O'Toole's body began sending signals that could not be ignored. Severe abdominal pain led to medical intervention and a warning that if he continued, the damage would be permanent and irreversible. He stopped drinking entirely. The warning had been received, but it had arrived decades too late. In 2013, Peter O'Toole died in a London hospital at the age of 81, his body carrying the accumulated weight of a lifetime of excess. The Academy, which had given him an honorary Oscar in 2003 in what felt like a tacit acknowledgement of one of the great oversights in award history, had at least given him that. 8 nominations, 1 honorary award, and a performance in Lawrence of Arabia that will still be studied 100 years from now. Number 2. W.C. Fields. William Claude Dukenfield, who the world came to know as W.C. Fields, was one of the most genuinely original comic talents in the history of American entertainment. His timing was impeccable. His voice, nasal and drawling, and laden with a theatrical pomposity that he deployed like a weapon, was completely distinctive. His persona, the grumbling, misanthropic, magnificently irritable man at war with children, dogs, and sobriety, was so perfectly calibrated that it became impossible to separate the character from the man, because by most accounts they were the same person. Fields achieved major film stardom in his mid-50s, which should have been the beginning of a long and celebrated final act. What it was instead was a race between his career and his body, and the body was losing badly. Reports from those who worked closely with him suggest he was consuming upward of 2 quarts of gin per day during his peak years. This level of consumption led to severe physical consequences, including episodes of delirium tremens, the violent physical reaction that occurs when someone at that level of dependency attempts to stop. By the late 1930s, Paramount Pictures, which had employed him through a string of successful comedies, dropped him entirely. His health had made him, in their calculation, too much of a risk. What saved what remained of his career, at least temporarily, was radio. He became a regular presence on the Chase and Sanborn Hour in 1937, where his comedic exchanges with ventriloquist Edgar Bergen's puppet Charlie McCarthy became beloved. The relative ease of radio work allowed him to function at a level that film production no longer could. He made a partial comeback in pictures in the early 1940s, but the damage to his body was irreversible. In the final 22 months of his life, Fields lived at a sanitarium in Pasadena, California. On Christmas Day 1946, a holiday he had famously and vocally claimed to despise, W.C. Fields suffered a massive internal hemorrhage and died at the age of 66. His gift had been immense. The window in which the world got to fully enjoy it was far shorter than it should have been. Number 1. Bernard Lee. If the name doesn't immediately ring a bell, the role will. For more than 2 decades, Bernard Lee was the face of M, the head of British intelligence, the man who briefed James Bond before every mission, in 11 official Bond films, from Dr. No in 1962 through Moonraker in 1979. He appeared in more than 100 film and television productions over a career that spanned half a century. He began performing on stage at the age of 6. He was, by every professional measure, one of the most steadily working and consistently respected character actors in the history of British cinema. And according to those who worked alongside him, he could outdrink every single person on this list. including Richard Burton, who once admitted openly that he could not match Bernard Lee when it came to sheer capacity. Burton, a man who had consumed 3 bottles of vodka a day and had his spine rebuilt after it was found coated in crystallized alcohol, reportedly said that Lee had outdrunk him when the two encountered each other. Let that sit for a moment. Lee's relationship with alcohol accelerated dramatically following a series of personal tragedies that arrived in close succession. His beloved wife died in a house fire. He was the victim of a brutal mugging. Financial difficulties mounted. The combination of grief and instability drove him into a dependence that those around him struggled to manage. During breaks from filming the Edgar Wallace television series, production staff reportedly found it necessary to confine him to his dressing room to prevent him from drinking between scenes. Lee allegedly found a solution. He paid someone to pass a drinking straw through the keyhole of his dressing room door, allowing him to continue without ever leaving the room. Bernard Lee continued to work. He continued to appear on screen. He continued to play M with authority and quiet dignity through 11 Bond films. And in 1981, he died of stomach cancer at the age of 73, a condition almost certainly linked, according to those familiar with his case, to the decades of heavy consumption. The Bond franchise retired the role of M entirely out of respect and did not recast it until 1983, with Judi Dench eventually making the role her own in 1995. The man who had briefed the world's most famous spy for 2 decades deserved a quieter ending than the one he received. These were not weak men. They were not small talents. They were, in several cases, among the most gifted human beings their profession ever produced. What connects them is not failure. What connects them is the particular cruelty of watching someone extraordinary slowly become less than what they were, and the realization that fame, money, and applause could not protect them from something that had nothing to do with any of those things. Hollywood has always been good at showing us what it wants us to see. What we've talked about today is what was happening just out of frame. Now I want to hear from you. Of everyone on this list, which story hit you the hardest? And do you think Hollywood today does a better job of protecting its talent? Or is the same story still playing out behind closed doors? Leave your answer in the comments and subscribe to the channel for more. We'll see you in the next one.